Hello, and thank you for joining this conversation, one of several we're having on about how to end the gun violence epidemic. So last Friday, I convened a discussion with law enforcement leaders in the 4th Congressional District, and I'll soon be talking to gun safety advocates and others about this preventable crisis. But today, I'm going to talk to a few of our elected leaders that work on ending this gun safety crisis. They work at the county level, the legislative level, and I will add, as we have other conversations, we do know city councils and school districts are working to address this problem as well. How do we end gun violence in our communities? Gun violence, mass killings, devastate families, they rip apart communities, and they force all of us to question our own safety. This week, 10 Minnesota hospital systems, and I'm going to quote directly from them, "We believe it's time to declare gun violence as a public health crisis and to work to prevent the deaths of innocent people of all ages and backgrounds. The common denominator is guns and the easy access to them by people intent on committing acts of violence. We all have a duty to act, but we also must listen to the community leaders, and that's what I'm doing." For members of the public who are viewing this discussion today or later, we'll have an opportunity for you to share comments with me. So please go to my website, www.mccollum.house.gov. And if you're live on a computer or a cell phone, that link's also available with information on my website. If you just Google in McCollum US Rep. So once again, we are heartbroken and we're outraged to the mass murder of elementary school children in Texas. Only days after a shooting in Buffalo, New York, literally massacring by targeting Black Americans in a neighborhood grocery store. And just this past week, more shootings in Tulsa, Tennessee, and Philadelphia. And I also don't want to forget that we need to also focus on gun safety for what we call accidental tragedies. It's quite often a child finding a loaded gun in a house and then shooting a friend, a neighbor, or a family member with that weapon. And then we also know weapons left unattended or easily available are also used in the violent act of suicide when we lose a loved one. But in the wake of tragedy after tragedy, I believe every member of Congress needs to be held accountable for the actions they take on effective gun laws. House Democrats are hearing loud and clear from the American people that they demand action. So this week, I voted to pass Protecting Our Children Act. This package will make enormous efforts in our fight against gun violence, raising the purchasing age of semi-automatic weapons from 18 to 21. Outlawing high-capacity magazines and bump stocks, subjecting ghost guns purchases to background check requirements, cracking down on gun trafficking laws and straw purchases, and strengthening safe storage requirements like gun locks to protect children from accidental shootings. There is no excuse for gun violence being the number one killer of children and teenagers in this country. And it's my hope the US Senate will join us in voting to protect children. We also passed the Federal Extreme Risk Protection Order Act. This legislation will keep guns out of the hands of those who pose a threat to themselves or others through a nationwide extreme risk law and encouraging states to enact their own. A lot of people hear this referred to as red flag laws. I have voted in the House of Representatives time and time again to ban assault weapons, to ensure that universal background checks block access to firearms for those who shouldn't have them. But common sense gun safety provisions are obstructed at every step of the way by the gun lobby and those who are their allies in Congress and state legislatures. The fact that states like Texas and Ohio are making it easier to carry firearms, including assault weapons, and they can have them without even permit or training. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done to make our communities safer. More than a year ago, House Democrats also passed two major gun violence prevention bills. I co-sponsored and supported them. It was a bipartisan background check act of 2021. It was the Enhanced Background Check Act of 2021. Senate Republicans continued to block those past actions on these common sense life-saving measures. And I believe this resulted in more preventable gun deaths. More and more, we are seeing the ideology of hate, including violent white supremacist beliefs, motivates or inspires these mass shooting incidents we're seeing. They're targeting our communities of color. And that is clearly evident in what happened in Buffalo, New York, and the massacre there. In response to that, the US House passed the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act of 2022 to combat the growing threat of violent extremist groups, individuals, including racial, ethnical, motivated extremists, and white supremacists. So as I continue to urge Senate action on legislation we passed in the House, we know that there's more work to do. I'm a member of a gun violence prevention task force, and I know that some of the people we talked with today are also working on their with their partners in their task force. So one of the things that I think people need to know that I am an original co-sponsor of the assault weapons ban to prohibit the sale, transfer, manufacture, and importation of semi-automatic weapons and ammunition feeding devices over 10 rounds. And I work to make sure that the use of burn grants that go to our local police departments and law enforcement agencies here in Minnesota, that they're able to buy back guns if that is one of the things that they would like to do with their burn grant. And last but not least, I signed a letter to the president seeking an executive order banning the importation of assault weapons. And I am working with the president in the Defense Appropriation Bill, which I chair, to implement some gun safety prevention measures in there in a way that some of our military hardware is distributed. So as an appropriator, let me just tell you, I am proud that I've been one of the leads in providing billions more dollars for burn grants and other resources to keep our communities safe. So next week, we're going to work on the active shooter alert. It's to create an Amber style notification during a mass shooting, and it is widely supported by law enforcement. So we're hoping the Senate, if once we pass that, could possibly take that bill up. So we'll be having hearings on assault weapon bans and other things. So as I get ready to turn to the panel, I just want to summarize. In Congress, my voice, my vote, my values are all focused on common sense measures that reduce gun violence and keep guns off of our street and eliminate access to guns that are designed for mass murder. The safeties of our communities and our families are my top priority. I can't believe that there's even a debate about putting the lives of school children, shoppers, parishioners, patients, moviegoers, concert goers, all of us, our lives ahead of the gun lobby and what they want to do to guarantee gun makers' profits. So I look forward to hearing the discussion today. I ask you to be direct and frank about what remains to be done here in Minnesota. But before I turn questions over to you, and we might have two other folks join us a little later, I would like each of you to introduce yourself. And I will start being a former state representative, Mr. Troy. I think you'll understand that I'm going to go with Representative Heiss first.
I'll unmute myself. Thank you so much, Congresswoman McCollum, for inviting me to be here today. I am Representative Sandra Feist. My district is in the North Metro. It is 41B, which is the southern part of New Brighton, Columbia Heights, St. Anthony, and Hilltop. I'm really gratified to be here today to have this really important conversation. I'm the mother of I was going to say 4th and 6th grader, but they just finished those grades yesterday. So a 5th and 7th grader. And obviously these issues are deeply personal to me, and I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts and updates on what we're up to at the state level. Thank you.
I think that's really important, because if we discuss about this impact on our children, you'll have your perspective. And I'm a perspective of children who are in their 40s who still talk about Columbine, which happened when they were young young adults, high school students. Ramsey County Attorney, John Troy.
Thank you, Congresswoman McCollum, first of all, for the invitation to be a part of this really important conversation, along with Representative Feist and other locally elected officials. But I want to thank you, first of all, for just the work that you do to ensure that you are connected to and talking to all of the local elected officials throughout your district. As the Ramsey County Attorney, I just so appreciate that you are very interested in wanting to support that. So I've had this great privilege to be able to serve the people of Ramsey County as their elected county attorney since 2011, and have been very involved with a lot of issues in trying to improve the justice system and safety. But there's one issue that has been very elusive and that I see repeating over and over again, which is the cycles of violence that we see in our communities and in the courtrooms. Oftentimes I have to pick up the pieces after tragedies have occurred. People have been shot and killed, and the victims are there who have lost loved ones, and also families who have who are supporting those who are accused of those crimes, seeing them go off to prison. This is a public health issue, and there are solutions at the local level, at the federal level, at the state level. But oftentimes, and this is so frustrating, and Congresswoman, you talked about this, we've been talking about this for our whole entire careers, and we can't get the traction that we need because, and I'll just be really blunt and bold, because of the extreme special interests that exist that shut down the 80% of people that want reasonable change in this country. And so this conversation is so important, and it's so important that you're in Congress because of the influence and the power that you have as an appropriator. And I know we'll have a chance to talk about some of the ways that you have really helped, I think, our East Metro community combat some of the violence and the shootings. But I just want to thank you for your leadership, the fact that you're there and you're not just in Washington, D.C., but you're here, you know, wanting to know and understand all of the issues that are playing out in our communities and take that back to Washington to try to make change. And so we're here for you to support your leadership, and I appreciate everybody that's here as a part of this convening to listen and learn and to figure out what we can do next.
Representative Feist, we have in our communities an active and robust, whether it's deer hunting or small bird hunting. Many of us have people in our family. I know we have in common a very special legislature from your area, and she hunts and she talks about what she does. But when I last left the state legislature, we were having discussions about what to do about concealed carry. And one of the things that became an issue, excuse me, allergies, became an issue was, what do we do about people who want to have a gun made available for them other than hunting? So if someone wanted to carry a handgun, if they were a person who took payroll or was making bank deposits, I used to do that when I worked retail. Some people felt that they would be safer with a gun. So what they would do is they would go to a police chief, a sheriff, law enforcement, and say, I'm going to be carrying a gun. This is why I think I need it. And there would be a limited cursory background check taken to make sure that that really was that person's intent, because it is a lethal weapon, one that needs to be kept track of in case of theft or robbery from a home or from a car. And what I noticed is when I'd go to local regional meetings for state representatives, or when I'd go to the National League of conferences for state legislators, we were starting to see these rolled out pieces of legislation sponsored by gun lobby groups And they were trying to get them introduced in every state house. And I was experiencing that when I left, and I experience it now as a member of Congress. Well, what are some of the things that the legislature is trying to do to address gun violence? And I know there's even talk about doing something in the special session. What are you seeing happen with legislation and people blocking legislation or introducing legislation to make some of these weapons, as we're seeing in Ohio and in Texas and other states? People are going to be introducing these bills here in Minnesota that you're going to have to fight against. Give us a snapshot of what you're up against.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I mean, these bills have definitely been introduced in Minnesota. Because the DFL has control of the state house, we haven't advanced those bills, of course. But I definitely receive emails from constituents and have had conversations with constituents that are in support of having ubiquitous guns in public. That's something that terrifies me just as a person in the world. And I'm pretty concerned about the case coming out of New York. That will be the Supreme Court. We're expected to have a decision, I believe, this month that would really limit our ability to restrict open carry and conceal and carry. So that's something that is definitely on my radar, and I'm sure all of our radars, as we look at how far this court is willing to interpret the Second Amendment. One thing that I've done, I've realized that I'm a very pragmatic person. I don't know if I realized that before I was in office, but I realized that I'm always kind of trying to figure out, like, what can I actually get done, rather than what can I tweet about. And so I've actually had some very productive conversations with colleagues across the aisle, with the Gun Owners Caucus and with NAMI Minnesota, to look at things that we all can agree on, because the issue of suicide prevention has to be really key in our conversations around gun violence prevention, because so many gun deaths are suicides, and that is an issue that affects the greater Minnesota. It affects all of us across Minnesota. And so I worked with colleagues across the aisle, with the Gun Owners Caucus, with Moms Demand Action, a friend of mine who was with them, and NAMI Minnesota, to create a framework around safe storage, because there is research published in the Journal of the American Medical Association that really looks at, and I don't think I'm saying anything that we don't know, but like safe storage is something that really can affect, reduce suicide by gun deaths by suicide, and can also reduce mass shootings. And so we created a framework around safe storage that would be kind of a PR campaign, similar to a very successful campaign around postpartum depression. And this bill was included in the Veterans Omnibus Bill this past session. It was not included in the negotiated and passed Veterans Omnibus Bill, unfortunately. It was really too bad. I actually thought it had a chance. It seems like the negotiations between Chair Eklund and Senator Lang were pretty efficient and effective after a pretty difficult session. So I'm hoping to see that bill advance next year as well. And again, what it would do is, when you talk to advocates for the Second Amendment, literally any restriction, any type of training or permit, is an unconstitutional infringement on the Second Amendment right. But informing people about the importance and the mechanisms for safe storage is something that they really do support. And so obviously this doesn't go as far as I would like to go, but it is something that I think we can achieve in Minnesota. And so that's something that I'm really optimistic about. Other legislation that has been introduced at the state level is mirrored at the federal level. So universal background checks, red flag laws. Those bills have been introduced. They were passed by the House in 2020 session. We were not able to pass them in this past session, and I think that's incredibly unfortunate. One other thing that I would like to see is, I was thinking about this as I was thinking about this conversation we were about to have. I would love to build broader coalitions. I'm thinking about the Chamber of Commerce. I'm thinking about, conservative organizations that, I'm a business owner. I have a law firm. I'm in Minneapolis right now at my law office. When people don't feel safe Like it inhibits like the exchange of money for goods. Like it inhibits our ability to like function as a society, for businesses to make money, for people to go on vacations. And I would be really interested to see if we can build coalitions that are bigger, and maybe convince more colleagues across the aisle that this is an issue that matters, from an economic standpoint, from an electoral standpoint, because I think right now the pressure is minimal on conservative lawmakers to really come to the table and look at some of these common sense things like bans on assault weapons. And so that's something that I'm kind of interested in. And I have reached out to the Gun Owners Caucus, and we're in the process of scheduling a meeting, because I do want to continue to have those conversations as we figure out like what can we do now and what do we need to do in the long term. And so I think that's where my head is at. I wrote some notes. One other just random idea that I've been talking about with people recently is some sort of law that would require people to report when a gun is stolen, just to create more of a responsibility for people who do own these deadly weapons. And that's something that doesn't seem like it would have Second Amendment implications. It's just saying that we want to know where these guns, who is in possession of these weapons, and when they are involved in a crime, somebody should have had a responsibility to report that weapon as stolen. So those are just some of the things that I have been up to, that the state legislature has been up to, and that have been on my mind.
Interesting that you brought up that you had suicide prevention in the Veterans Bill Act. That is something that we have been laser focused and put phenomenal amount of dollars in, and at a federal level, dealing with suicide. And I'm very active in the veterans community. I have multitudes of generation of veterans in my family. And if you can get veterans to talk about how they feel about guns, a lot of them are very strong on Second Amendment, but a lot of them, because of all the training that they've had and what sometimes that they've witnessed them being used in acts of war, just the violence that erupts from the end of that muzzle, and how it changes the shooter's life, as well as anyone being shot at, wounded, or killed. They're very dynamic, heartfelt, difficult conversations to have with our veterans community. So know that that's one thing that we talk about a lot at times within VA groups. It's a trigger lock. I had when I was at North St. Paul High School, I had a student who committed suicide. I'm having that empty desk, talking to students about it, and even finding out that there was a suicide pact out there that put us all into high gear, not me particularly, but school counselors reaching out to other parents, friends of the children, that two of them had committed suicide, one in Florida, one in Minnesota, but they had known each other. All the things that go involved in that. And you mentioned NAMI, which is a mental health organization, which is we need to have at the table. But that, in my opinion, lots of that is to talk about suicide prevention, but is often used as a cover not to do anything. That it's a mental health issue. Well, there was no mental health record that I'm aware of in either the Buffalo shooting or the shooting that took place at the schools in Texas. Mm-hmm. So to say that mental health, if we focus on that and not focus on ending the ability to just purchase these weapons of mass murder, would have somehow solved the problem. So there are a lot of moving pieces as you described in it. So one of the things that you mentioned is, just kind of feeling safe. And that is one of the discussions I've been trying to have. Everybody has the right to speak however they wish about the Second Amendment. I do believe that there are some legal constitutional restrictions we can put on the Second Amendment, because throughout our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, it is the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And part of that is feeling safe in your community. And I have been in states with these open carry laws, and you walk into a grocery store and there's somebody with a gun holster around them. I don't know who they are. I'm in line, they ask to go in front, or it's the last turkey that's left. I mean, all these things kind of go through everyday people's minds. Is maybe that person doesn't mean it to be bullying or intimidating, but the fact that they have a weapon on them in a setting which should be non-threatening just has ripple effects. I've had people say now that some of the concealed carry laws in Minnesota, weapons of mass destruction that are available without registration and easy access, even coming to a congressional office or going to a town hall is now making people feel uncomfortable. So thank you for kind of wrapping that whole thing about feeling safe on it, which is going to lead me to something I'm going to ask you about, Mr. Troy. So last week, St. Paul's new Office of Neighborhood Safety outlined Operation Peace to focus on deterring and interventing where gun violence is happening most frequently. And the part of St. Paul I live in is right up against it, if not near in the heart of it. So I hear the gunshots go off. I hear the police and the ambulance responding sometimes all times during the day, but mostly in the evening. So can you describe a little bit about what we can do to help people who have someone who's involved with a weapon or they're concerned that they could become a victim? Can you describe how your community violence partnership that you're heading is going to try to stop that cycle from spinning out of control, and maybe how you think it could integrate with the St. Paul's new Office of Neighborhood Safety?
Well, thank you, Congresswoman McCollum, for the invitation for us to be able to talk about some of these issues, and more specifically, some of the work that we're trying to do here in Ramsey County, as well as also regionally as well, because solutions in Ramsey County can't be isolated from solutions in the East Metro and also in Hennepin County as well. So one of the most important things that I think that we need to do with regard to things that we do in our community and at the local level is to have a common understanding of what is driving some of the violence, and have a common way in which we go about addressing it. And I think with regard to any type of community where you've got different perspectives, sometimes that can be really hard. And so we've been engaged in a long conversation, but it starts with bringing people together to have the conversations to understand what is going on. And certainly what we know what is going on is that we as a community are experiencing things that we have never really experienced before around some escalating incidents and data that tells us that violent crime is increasing. People are experiencing this new phenomena of carjacking, oftentimes people brandishing a weapon in doing that particular crime. And this has really caused a sense of frustration and fear and stress all over our community. And so I think in that context of stress, oftentimes we kind of go back to, we might try to, in the system, political leaders might deflect the blame or say, this is happening because of this issue, or it's this issue or that issue. And so I think the most important thing is to bring people together, and that's what we've been doing in St. Paul to create this group called the Violence Reduction Leadership Group, to have a common understanding of the things that we need to do at the local level and understand the challenges, and then commonly together commit to actual real solutions. So one of the areas in which we've been able to develop consensus is that there are a number of approaches to addressing violence that focus around understanding that there's only a small number of people that might be doing the shootings, who might be involved in the carjackings or that type of violent crime. And so if we understand that it's a small part of our community, then what we can do then is to agree that police have to be involved as a part of that solution, and community has to be involved as a part of that solution. And so what we have come up with is to utilize these principles of something called focused deterrence, which is an evidence-based way of actually reducing violence and shots fired in communities across America. And so what we've been doing is partnering community and police working together, community being that moral voice. And so what we do is we do notifications to people that we know are involved in, like, for instance, gun violence. They might be in prison, they might be in jail, they might be at a juvenile correctional facility, or they might be tangentially involved and they haven't been caught yet or not prosecuted. But what we do is we do a custom notification to tell them that we know that they're involved in this type of activity, that we tell them that this cannot continue to occur, that it has to stop, but that we also have a very sincere offer of services and support, right? And so the community and police are delivering this message together, which I think is so important because we've become so disjointed at times, that together that approach is, then we have a very sincere offer of 24/7 services. And that type of approach has proven to work. Now, because of your leadership, Congresswoman McCollum, we are now able to take that to the next level by securing technical assistance from the National Network of Safe Communities out of John Jay College. The leader of that organization is Dr. David Kennedy, who is the founder of Focused Deterrence Principles. And so he will now be providing, because of the appropriation, the technical assistance for the Office of Neighborhood Safety that will be doing the work in St. Paul, for the work that's happening under a grant through the Sheriff's Office and the County Attorney's Office and the African American Leadership Council and the Black Ministerial Alliance. But anybody and anyone that wants to use these types of approaches, and any police agency now can get that technical assistance. And then the second piece of that is that your investment is allowing for someone to be hired as a coordinator for all this work. Because what was happening before is that all of these various agencies were trying to, cobble together all of this, but now we're going to have a coordinated effort. We're going to have that coordination come out of the Office of Neighborhood Safety in St. Paul that will also support other groups and police departments that want to do this work around the county. And then the latter third will actually be able to resource more the community partners that need to be involved with the police to do specific focused deterrence efforts. And I'm absolutely confident that if we do this the right way with fidelity, and we do it in a way that reflects the values that are important to our community, and we have a governance board that comprises of elected officials. I see that Commissioner Tristan Castillo is on the call. She's one of the governance board members. I am too, as well as others in our locally elected officials. And I'm absolutely convinced that if we do this model with fidelity, that we will be able to make a dramatic impact on reducing shootings. Because the way that we always sometimes think about it is like, well, maybe we could just prosecute the person who does the shooting, investigate the crime, prosecute them, and send them to prison for a long time. And yeah, we do that. But what I've just done is I've just removed one person from the equation. The reality is that gun violence is an epidemic, and oftentimes we see in group settings, we see retaliation going back and forth. In fact, like that truck stop shooting that we had on West 7th Street, that was a remnant of group involved violence from a decade ago. And so we have to recognize that it's not just the enforcement or the prosecution and the incarceration of one person. It's also recognizing this as an epidemic, a public health issue, and to utilize those strategies to recognize that there's a way to intervene in these cycles. Otherwise, what happens is we will, more people will start realizing this, but I see this every day, is that we have repetitive cycles of violence, people caught in it from generation to generation to generation. We see grandkids, fathers, and grandfathers who are all in the system who were involved in shootings. And this cycle will perpetuate and continue unless we started thinking about working together and figuring out ways to interrupt it and seriously look at this as a public health issue and not only as a public safety, prosecution, incarceration type of issue. So I'll
Well,
just talk to
yeah, so you have to put together the organization to be able to do the work. So once the work's done, it's going to be very personal from what I'm hearing. You'll either identify somebody that is incarcerated or going through the court system, say, hey, I can tell that you made a bad choice and you're recognizing that now. What can you do to make someone you care about not make that same bad choice? And then you'll have the tools in your toolbox to, get the community and the support system involved to do the interaction, to try and hopefully end that cycle of violence that sometimes just escalates up just because that's all anybody thinks of. They haven't really thought out their actions or realized what they were doing or realized that action wasn't a solution, that it maybe, tragically ended someone else's life. And hopefully that person's feeling remorse for it and will want to do something for it. If they're not feeling remorse for it, there's another power that takes care of that, and that's beyond law enforcement, and that's just my personal faith system and belief.
or it might be their friend, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
whose friend just got shot, who feels like they have to avenge that death, right? And so that's the approach of what focused deterrence is all about, is to interrupt that and to stop that cycle to repeat itself.
Well, I want to go to our county commissioner here, and you can add a little bit on. We've got 20 minutes left. Add on a little bit about what Mr. Troy just said. But I want to use a statistic here, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. 75% of the firearms used in youth suicide attempts and unintentional firearms were stored in the residence of the victim, the relative, or a friend. In other words, they knew there was a gun there, they had access to it, and there was nothing preventing them from being able to use that gun. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what Ramsey County is doing? And then we'll hear from Senator Pappas, and I see that Representative Feist wanted to add a little something to the conversation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Congresswoman.
Oh, and introduce yourself for the group.
Yep, certainly. So I'm Trista Mendes Castillo, and I'm the chair of the Ramsey County Board. And I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation that is critically important to protect our communities. I think everyone agrees that gun violence is a public health crisis across our nation. And from the county, we are looking really at that health issue around guns and safety. One of the things, as you were talking about that retaliatory and how people respond, we used our ARP funds. Thank you for help securing those at the county.
So we try to be initial free.
Oh, sure, yes. American Rescue Plan funds. Thanks. To actually invest in our Healing Streets program, which really goes a long way in interacting when there are situations of violence so that there isn't that retaliatory and repetitive violence. We have teams that are on scene right away and work with the folks that are involved in violence or potentially may. And they're also working on the grief and mental health issues of everyone impacted around and helping provide resources so they can figure out how to process their emotions and not going to a violence. So for instance, the attorney, John Choice, mentioned the truck park shooting. They were involved in that and actually intervened and worked closely with the victims and bystanders, as well as perpetrators, family members, and kind of the broader community to make sure that we're not adding to that kind of escalation of violence. And it goes a long way in research. There's been so much trauma in our community that people haven't had the skills or resources on how to process that trauma. And so when we internalize it, it comes in forms of depression and anger, and then we act out. And as you mentioned, the statistics about having access to guns is a huge problem. The more access, the more likely they are to be used. And so, the county has had a long program for a decade providing gun locks for people who want to lock up their guns and who should lock up their guns in storage. But it's just the bare minimum really about how we can store our firearms. We really need to continue with education around reducing the number of guns, the access to guns, where they're stored, where there's ammunition, and education. If people want to have guns in their homes, they really need to separate them and keep them out of the reach of young people, and make sure that the ammunition and guns are not in the same location, that they're in a locked safe, and not have access, because it will reduce. The county also, as you know, because of additional funding, we also invested in mental health programs, and really taking a look at to make sure that anyone in our community, if they're thinking about suicide or having thoughts of suicide or violence, that we will treat them and they can reach out to the county for mental health supports as well.
Thank you. Well, Senator Pappas, earlier on, I was talking about the challenges I'm having with U.S. Senate, not our U.S. senators here from Minnesota. Smith and Klobuchar are all about reducing gun violence and common gun safety. But you're running into the same issue. Representative Feist was kind of sharing that we were sharing our pain and dealing with the Senates, both in DC and here at home. Maybe, and I know that Representative, I keep wanting to call you by your first name and I want to be formal, but let me just put it this way. You and I, Commissioner McGuire and others have been working on this issue for decades and decades. What are some of the things that you think that you could maybe try to find a little bit of common ground as they're trying to in the U.S. Senate moving forward, in light of these shootings now just happening over and over and over and over again? And the public, the overwhelming public, wants, assault. They don't want assault weapons readily available. They want background checks. We didn't even talk about what's going on with ghost guns yet. Give us your perspective as a Minnesota senator who's been passionate about working on this issue for years.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman McCollum. First of all, I want to apologize for being late. I was distracted reading the news about the first January 6th hearing last night, which I caught most of, and the time just got away from me. This is a very important topic. Obviously, I don't know how a well-regulated militia in the Second Amendment evolved to open carry and AR-15 sales to 18-year-olds. I mean, it seems to me that that right to a well-regulated militia has been really taken terribly, terribly extreme and out of context. I was thinking about your question about perhaps because there was a great deal of support for the mental health bill. It's one of the few bills that passed for more mental health beds and more mental health services, that perhaps we could find common ground on topics around moving upstream with youth. And Representative Feist and I have been having some brief conversations about this and how we can reach out to troubled youth who may be bullied in school, who may feel alienated, who may be having problems at home, to identify signals that they're in trouble, because some of these mass shootings are really also suicides, going out in a flame, right? And is there a way that, besides, obviously, we want to limit their access to guns with red flag laws if there's obviously a mental health issue, but is there a way that, John and the county and others, County Attorney Choi, have talked about, prevention and programs and steering youth into more productive activities. And when I'm out door knocking these days, I do hear that from the neighborhood a lot, is that we need more activities for kids to keep them busy so they're not getting into trouble, carjacking, or whatever is going on. So that, and also, perhaps more, if we have to have guns, kind of embracing that with very intense safety training. You mentioned how to carefully lock up your gun, how these are dangerous, they should never be pointed at anyone. If we're going to be a gun society, then maybe we need to understand how we can be safe with guns. I don't know. I mean, I think that that's part of our history. The NRA began as a way to treat gun safety and for target practice at camp. which a lot of boys, and these days it would include girls, would do. And I think they have certainly gone off and a far field from that. But those were just two thoughts that I had about how we might be able to find common ground with Republicans on these issues.
Well, and I say this as I mentioned earlier, I've been a classroom teacher at the high school level about, guns in schools and teachers being armed. And I watched one representative from another state on an interview when asked, well, who's going to provide the training? Who's going to pay for the gun? Who's going to do the storage? Because you need to be real careful. If everybody assumes that a teacher has a gun in a classroom, I can't even begin to imagine how many guns could be in some classes. And then it'll be, the custodians and the lunchroom ladies, and then is it open carry? So I think we need to have a real conversation about what we're really saying when we talk about guns in schools. But just putting that aside, if the expectation is with my teaching license, I can carry, we don't have gun registration, for assault weapons. Do I bring an assault weapon? Are we talking about a handgun? I mean, this is just so wide open that you can't imagine what a classroom, what a school looks like anymore. But let's just talk about training for a minute. Is that teacher person in the school district, are they going to be required to have the same amount of training that a law enforcement officer has, which someone has to pay for it? Then they go back in, they get recertified, right, to make sure that they're using their weapon properly, that they know how to discharge it properly. There's a lot of training that goes involved with law enforcement.
Congresswoman, I wasn't advocating teachers.
No, I know you weren't. I'm just, I know you never would. I'm just saying, when people talk about this, they don't talk about it's just thrown out as an example. We'll have more good people with guns, therefore that's a good thing. And like you were saying about training, my son was a Boy Scout. He did the training, the merit badge that included weapons and firing guns. And I have to say that was a good thing. He talked about what it felt like, and he didn't like it and things like that. So, and realized how dangerous they are. And he wasn't automatically a good shot. So it's just kind of getting into the whole training and the whole thing about, arming the public. If to that point, Senator Pappas, you're right. If that's the path that some of our colleagues want to go down, then they have the responsibility of saying that they're also going to provide the training and the responsibility, and then the holding accountable when things don't go right. Our police departments are even held accountable when things don't go right. So, Senator, thank you for bringing that up, because we do need, and Representative Feist was talking about that, we do need to talk to everybody. If we don't talk together and figure out how to find common ground, then this will just escalate it. So we've got, about 9 minutes left. I'd like each of you to just kind of take a minute and just kind of like the one big takeaway, or the one thing that you're working on, or the one thing you want people to know in a minute. We'll start with Representative Feist, and then we'll go Mr. Choi, and then Commissioner, and you, Senator. We'll let you, and then I'll close up. And thank you all for being here. This has been a great conversation. Representative.
Thank you. And thank you again for inviting me to be here and for your leadership at the federal level. It's wonderful to have your partnership and to be looking at everything that we can do at the state and federal level. One thing that I was going to mention and follow up to County Attorney Choi's comments is that one of my passion projects is to look at restorative justice, specifically in the youth setting. I was the chief author of the Veterans Restorative Justice Act that passed last year, and now I'm turning to youth. But when we can help people who have committed a crime to understand the consequences of their behavior, and also to look at the underlying factors to support them, to help them get on the better path. That's something that affects all of our, that helps support public safety. And so that's just something that kind of builds on what County Attorney Choi was talking about with his efforts. And it's something that is indirectly related to the issue that we're talking about today around gun violence. But yes, thank you again for inviting me. I'm very committed to this issue. It's incredibly important to my community and to our state. I have taken the approach of trying to have as many conversations with as many stakeholders as possible to find out where we can have that bipartisan intersection. Restorative justice does appear to be one of those areas. And as I mentioned, I've been working on that safe storage kind of PR campaign bill as well, which Commissioner Matis Castillo was talking about. So I look forward to partnering with everyone here and with the community to take steps both in the short term and the long term to make us all be safer and feel safer. Thank you.
Thank you. County Attorney Choi.
Well, thank you, Representative McCollum, again for this convening. I think it's so important. It's a great conversation. And thank you, Sandra, Representative Feist, for just mentioning what you just mentioned about restorative justice. As you know, we are doing a lot of things here in Ramsey County, and I really appreciate the partnership that we have between the state and your office and the work that we're doing here. But one of the observations that I just want to make is that when I heard today from all of these great elected officials, is that we're willing to listen and compromise and recognize that there's another aspect or other perspectives. But what frustrates me is that I believe that a lot of the elected officials here, the ideas that have been formulated, the bill that was passed by the House at the federal level, those are very reasonable things that we're just asking others who might have different perspectives to think about and actually allow it to happen, right? And this is the greatest frustration that I have around this topic, is that we can't get traction. And I feel like, with the elected officials here, we're all being reasonable. We're listening to perspectives. We're trying to moderate. We're not trying to win the argument. We just want to do right by our people and keep them safe. But yet, too often I hear the possibility of passage for the bill that you passed, Congresswoman McCollum and your colleagues, is unlikely in the Senate. The same can be said in Minnesota. It's unlikely that it will be passed in the Senate. And I think that we need to get to a place that we recognize that we represent everybody. We have to meet each other where we're at and really come to real solutions that will work. And so, Congresswoman McCollum, thank you for your leadership and always showing up that way and trying to find those solutions at the local level and listening to the people that we represent. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner.
I'll get off mute. Thank you so much. I would agree with what County Attorney Choi said, that we really are looking for compromise, but we also want to resource people with skills so that they're not turning to a gun to solve any situation or problem. And I'll go a little further. I actually, as someone who is trained in the military, I have very well knowledge on weapons. I see them as a tool, and I actually disagree that people need to have them at all, because we can't solve our problems with them, and more guns, even more good people with guns, certainly wouldn't have prevented any of the mass shootings that we have just experienced. In fact, our law enforcement has guns. They arrived on those scenes. It wouldn't have prevented it. It's all reactionary. And so more guns is not the solution. I would encourage people to think about other skills and resources that are available. And if they are going to be gun owners, then we really do want them to store them properly, safely, and keep them out of the hands of children and other people who are vulnerable, and to make sure that they really are being responsible gun owners. And as a county, we want to provide those resources, the mental health resources, the Healing Streets resources. Gun locks are available, no questions asked, free of charge at the county at a bare minimum, as well as we are using our resources to back you up, Congresswoman McCollum, and the House passage of the bill, and encourage the Senate to pass that bill too, because it's a reasonable and sensible bill that really will begin to address the issues of gun violence in our community, and we'll bring our resources at the county to support that. So thank you so much for bringing this conversation.
Well, thank you, Senator Pappas. As I mentioned, this is something I know you and I have been working on for decades, and we're not going to walk away from the issue. What would you like to say in closing?
Well, I want to add my thanks to all of the colleagues on the call for your work over many years on these issues. And I really appreciate having such a group of talented individuals to work with that are so have such strong passionate feelings on these very important issues. I wanted to follow up with Representative Feist with just a little story of something that happened to me out on the while door knocking, and I've been a supporter of the Second Chance Coalition, so following up with her restorative justice comment and voting rights for felons. And I was at a door, and I always carry voter registration forms with me, and my first person that I registered to vote was a woman who was an ex-felon. She'd been off probation for 7 years, and she still hadn't voted. And I said, you know, you can vote now. You can legally vote. And I'm here to register you. I will turn in your form. You'll get a card in the mail confirming that you have the right to vote. And that was just really very rewarding experience. I mean, there's more that we need to do for ex-felons in terms of jobs and housing and education, but certainly they deserve to have the right to vote.
Well, thank you. I want to thank all of you who joined us in the discussion today. We had other legislators who I've been speaking to. I could start mentioning names, but then I would forget someone and be in big trouble. But I really appreciate, especially the core group of people in the 4th District. We all work together. We all are elected by the same people, and we all have a responsibility to make sure that we reinforce each other's good works for the best of our communities. So I, like you, will remain steadfast in my commitment to work with you, to work with anyone to reduce gun violence and keep our communities and our families safe, especially our children. In the upcoming weeks, Congress will be taking some action, and we'll stay tuned to see what happens at the state level. But in the meantime, we need to be listening to what the public's saying, and that is take action now. And we know that there are a lot of folks that agree on background checks, age for assault weapons, banning high capacity clips, all these things. And we haven't even gotten to the surface yet of what's going on with ghost guns, because most of the public doesn't know what is happening with ghost guns and how minors are accessing that over the internet. Great discussion to have at another date. So we'll be talking to gun safety advocates in the future, and also talking to some of our school districts and healthcare professionals about some of the steps that they think we need to be taking. This is an all of the above approach in dealing with this, and it's going to take as the commissioners and as you in state office said, it's going to take everybody. We can't solve this by ourselves, and we can't keep having legislation that doesn't go anywhere. You need to take steps to start showing that we can make a difference in this. So for those of you from the public who are viewing the discussion today or reviewing it later, or want information on it, you can go to my website, and that is mccollum.house.gov. There are links on there. We are going to be putting up links to in our website to some of the legislation that is passed and pending on the U.S. Congress, and we will also put up some information for Ramsey County, both at the county attorney level and the county commissioners level, on how to get involved in these programs that they're working on together. And I know Washington County is also doing many of the same similar steps, and how to go about, if you want to make your house safe, if you have a gun in it, make it safe that you don't have an accidental discharge that either harms someone or causes an unintentional death, how to get involved in having trigger locks, or even if your gun's stolen, it slows down the process of that being used in a crime. So thank you all for joining me here today. I wish you all a fabulous Minnesota weather weekend. I'm happy to be home, and my fingers are crossed that it rains when I'm not doing any activities this weekend. So all the best to all of you, and thank you so much for those of you who will be reaching out to learn more on this issue. With that, I close. Thank you.